that I may pray a while before Louis struck. Then I put out my hand, so that would be the sign.
All right, so let's good stuff there.
Dude, stop. You
Wait.
would have kind of got a pause just before you swung.
We had to just finish a little bit of notes. So we finished watching that. Don't forget to turn in the EI chart. And of course, there's only one unit quiz with this unit. There was only one chapter. So don't forget about that. And then, actually, I had just a little bit to share about the Netherlands before we got to Eastern Europe. We left off, of course, before by talking about the changes in England leading up to the events that we saw in this film. But the Netherlands are remarkable because they had a republic, a representative form of government, still obviously with a lot of influence by the nobility. But the remarkable thing about them is because of their endorsement of Protestant faith, their particular vein, they believe the more successful you were in life, the more blessed you were by God. And so they saw work and the accumulation of wealth is not necessarily a bad thing, but a good thing. And so because of that, the Netherlands became incredibly tolerant because if you want to be able to be successful, you have to do business with as many people as possible. So their society actually ended up being one of the more open ones in Europe at an earlier stage. And of course, the most successful city would be Amsterdam, one of the leading cities in Europe when it came to things like finance and trade. And of course, one of the most famous companies in Europe would be the Dutch East India Company. The Dutch East India Company symbolized that sense of trade, obviously in their name, helping to bring resources from Southern Asia. So even though it was a republic, they did have a noble that served as the executive, and that would be the leader of the House of Orange. Which actually ended up being William of the couple William and Mary that would end up ruling over England as well. And so this time period in the 17th century was known as the Dutch Golden Age, since they were able to bring enormous amounts of wealth to themselves because of some of these policies. And to finish up here, let's look at Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe. Some general things about Eastern Europe. Technologically underdeveloped. And this would be until even the late 1800s.
The late what? 1900s?
Until the late 1800s. And because of the climate and difficulty in keeping animals, there was a lot of manual labor that was still done by people in the East that was done by animals in the West. being able to keep, maintain, and raise things like horses, oxen, and other stuff was a lot more difficult in the much cooler, often inhospitable climate of Eastern Europe.
How east are we talking?
Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and so on.
Russia.
Yes.
Mm.
Serfs made up a percentage of the population, or a significant percentage of the population. And a difference between slaves and serfs is that slaves belong to people, but serfs belong to the land, which is, of course, controlled by nobles. Unlike in Western Europe, where you had a number of large cities with tens of thousands of people, there would be significantly fewer in Eastern Europe. So some of these countries include Poland. The last strong ruler of Poland will be in 1683. 1683, even having a strong army. But the lower nobility was allowed to help choose the king. And so after this time, because this particular king had a strong military, they were worried that they would use that to intimidate them, the lower nobility. So from that point on, they started electing weaker monarchs, hoping that there wouldn't be one person that would be able to dominate Poland. And also going along with that, to make a weak monarch, they would sometimes choose relatives of the noble family that weren't even Polish, maybe lived outside of Poland. So that way it would bring an extra barrier to having a strong leader. And they did have a form of a legislature there, but it too was weak because any one member could disband it. So they basically had a weak government, weak leadership, and unfortunately this will set them up in the long run to eventually become a place that is easily invaded. Then there's Austria. And Austria will be ruled by the Habsburg family, which is spelled Hapsburg. That's Hapsburg. And they'll obviously control various territories, including the Netherlands at one point before it became a republic, and territories within the Italian peninsula. And they'll eventually expand their empire to the south of their country, including places like Hungary, for instance. And then, of course, there's Russia. Russia always had kind of an identity crisis. Are they Eastern, as in a sense Asian, or are they European or Western? Many of their culture had been influenced by the invasion of Mongolians. But by the time that Peter the Great came to the throne, a member of the Romanov family, from his younger days when he traveled up along down the northern coast of Europe, seeing amazing shipbuilding happening, technological advancements, he decided to start westernizing Russia, including more simple type of tasks like requiring the nobles to shave, for instance, not growing long beards, wearing Western style clothing, and at least amongst military leaders and nobles, getting an education. But that will be extremely limited because despite his reforms, the monarchy for a considerable time, we'll talk more about this later, will retain an incredible amount of control, and they will also retain the serfdom system for a considerable time as well. But of course, the one thing that is always important to a lot of the Russian rulers is to expand territory and have access to warm water. because obviously a great portion of their ports were in the north and were frozen most of the year. So that's why they would always endeavor into places like the Middle East, or even till today, Russia has troops in the Ukraine. So those are all the notes, and you can submit those whenever you're done putting in your comments in that, and the summary down at the bottom. And then next week we'll move on to the next unit.
Can I finish Cromwell?
You can finish Cromwell.